The Spanish have an expression, April will bring the rains. That's the English translation, of course. No matter which language you say it in, though, this year it proved to be wrong. In April this year, there was no rain. In fact, this April was the hottest and driest one on record. This March was Spain's second driest in 100 years. I can go on, but you get the idea. Spain is suffering a drought. Experts are calling it a mega drought. It has come with an unusually early heat wave. The result is this: water shortages, skyrocketing food prices, farmers fighting for their survival. What's worse, now Spain is on the path to becoming a desert. 75% of the country is already in the process of desertification. Here's a report.
Spain is dehydrated. It is running out of water, and this has become the country's biggest crisis. A long list of reasons is behind this. The biggest one is its drought. It was long and painful, a mega drought according to experts. Spain saw an unusually warm winter and a sheer lack of rain. 30 consecutive months recorded below average rain. This was followed by hot months. They consecutively hit record temperatures. And now there's a heat wave which has come earlier than expected. Now combine all these factors. They will lead you to Spain's depleted reservoirs. They are drying up. Some of them are at less than 25% of their capacity.
The summers are getting longer and longer, and of course, evaporation takes its toll, and also there is this strong drought that we are not used to. The fact that it just rained for 2 days in 2023, everything has conspired to create the perfect storm.
A perfect storm indeed, one that is hot, dry and is drinking up all of its water. This is obviously hurting Spain on multiple levels. The country is called Europe's back garden because it exports a large chunk of what it produces. But now agriculture is taking a hit, so farmers are the first to suffer. Their crops are dying. 60% of their cereal crops have dried out. The cultivation of key crops like olive, almond and pistachio have also taken a hit. Thousands have lost the means to their daily bread.
Spain is experiencing the most severe drought in recent years after the last one in 1993. 30 years have passed. This time, it is even more severe than the previous one. More than 60% of Spanish farmland is being affected by the drought. There is uncertainty in the farming sector due to the lack of water for irrigation and because of the chaos this is causing, as we don't know if we will be able to save our crops or whether the trees will be able to survive.
The suffering of farmers has also become the country's pain because the prices of food are soaring and people are unable to afford basic things like olive oil.
The price of edible oil has risen significantly. Fruit prices are also climbing. The price hike of all edible oils is very crazy. Overall, all the prices are going up.
As if these problems weren't enough, Spain has a new disaster in the making. It is slowly turning into a desert. 75% of the country is going through desertification. The country's climate is changing and people are struggling to cope. They are protesting. Thousands are holding processions to pray for rain. And the government is scrambling to take action. They have imposed new policies. But at this point, it all feels like too little, too late. For decades, Spain has overexploited its groundwater, 80% of which is attributed to farming. It didn't take enough measures to curb the damage. And now, climate change has made everything worse. They urgently need to adapt to this new arid climate and rethink how they use water. If they want to act, the time is now, because the desert sands of time are slipping through their hands.
You've heard of life coaches, I'm sure, or career coaches. But do you know about smile coaches? They're specialist smile tutors, and they've become all the rage in Japan, especially in the post-Wuhan virus era. 2 months back, Japan lifted its mask mandate. You don't have to wear a mask in public anymore, which should be good news, except that the Japanese have forgotten how to express it with a smile. After spending almost 3 years behind masks, their facial muscles have become a bit rusty, it seems. People say they've forgotten how to smile. So now they're paying tutors to teach them how to smile. I'm not making this up. The next time someone says, you can't put a price on a smile, tell them about this. Because Japan's smile coaches charge up to $650. Here's a report.
It takes 43 muscles to frown and only 17 muscles to smile. But that's easier said than done. Introverts will probably relate to this. But what's happening now is not limited to them. We're talking about the Japanese. They've been concealing their mouths for 3 years now, covering their faces with masks, all thanks to the Wuhan virus. But this March, their government relaxed the mask rules, so the Japanese people became free to roam around without masks. But this didn't really relax them. In fact, it had the very opposite reaction. Because with the mask off, their emotions lay bare, so they are now trying to put smiles on their faces. Except instead of beaming grins, they are breaking into awkward smiles, some of which are completely fake, and others simply look pained. We're not kidding. The Japanese are really struggling with their smiles. They're failing to adapt to a life without face masks. Some say they have completely forgotten how to smile. Others say they try to smile, but their facial muscles are rusty. Some have even developed a complex about it. They feel awkward about their smile. So they're looking for solutions. They want to relearn the art of smiling. And, believe it or not, there are people who specialize in helping them. We're talking about smile coaches. Japan has hundreds of them. They're specialist smile tutors who are teaching people how to smile. They have become pioneers of an odd business that is surprising the world: smile education. These tutors want people to devote time to smiling, to do it consciously and do it more often. They now have thousands of students who pay about $650 each to regain their smile. For them, this course is totally worth it, and that sounds believable. Smiling is good for both physical and mental well-being. It helps people live longer by relieving stress, boosting immune systems, and reducing blood pressure. Plus, social contact is the key to good living, and facial expressions are the key to social contact. The Japanese know this. They've even inculcated a culture of laughter yoga, much like in India. But due to social distancing, they seem to have forgotten the basics. So the Japanese are participating in smiling studies. They're learning how to relax their facial muscles and training them just as they train their body muscles. They're holding up mirrors to check their progress, and a lot of them are coming out of these classes happy customers. And why wouldn't they? After all, they spend hours smiling. These classes are a hit among Japanese women, but these classes aren't just for retail customers. Companies like IBM are holding smile training sessions for their employees too. And nursing homes are hiring smile tutors for their elderly residents. We know this sounds odd, hiring a tutor and paying to relearn something as basic as smiling, but maybe there is an upside to this. Maybe we can all learn a bit from the Japanese. Along with leg and arm days during our workouts, maybe we can also incorporate smile days.
Qatar could soon have a top job at the United Nations. It's been nominated to lead the ILO, that's the International Labour Organization. Think of it as the labour police. They protect the rights of workers, they suggest reforms, and they also prepare reports on various countries. Next month, the ILO will hold its annual conference. A new chair will have to be nominated there. Reports say it will be this man, Saeed bin Samik al-Mari, the Labour Minister of Qatar. And his name is controversial, I'll tell you why. Imagine you have a UN body on rebuilding Ukraine after the war. Would you nominate Russia to lead it? Of course not. Now imagine there is a United Nations body for Uyghur protection. Would you nominate China to head it? I'm assuming not. Now this move by the ILO is no different because Qatar's treatment of labourers is notorious. Think back to last year's FIFA World Cup. Do you remember all the controversy around it? Reports said 6,500 migrant workers died at construction sites. They died building stadiums, roads and hotels, but Qatar has not even acknowledged it. Even before the World Cup, their record was poor. No right to strike, no right to organize, no right to demand higher wages. They also had something called the kafala system. It's basically a sponsorship. A company would pay and house migrant workers. In return, they would have complete control over those workers. Their passports could be taken away. Even changing jobs required the employer's permission. This was almost like forced labor. On paper, Qatar has abolished the system, but reports say it is still prevalent. And yet, Qatar has been nominated to lead the ILO. What explains this double game? In one word, money. I'll recount two cases for you. The first is from 2017. Qatar gave $25 million to the ILO's Doha office. What for? To run a labor reforms program. Now, countries donating to the ILO is not new or unusual, but $25 million? That's not a donation, that's a bribe. Speaking of which, Qatar is directly bribing government officials as well. Look at this headline. Member of European Parliament denies Qatar bribery after €1.5 million seized. In November, this politician defended Qatar's labor record. 1 month later, she was arrested. So this has been Qatar's policy, use petrodollars to bribe and lobby abroad. That's how they got the 2022 World Cup. That's how they could lead the ILO too. In December last year, the organization's chief visited Doha. He was all praises. He said there was progress on health, safety and working hours. Now, let's be clear here. Qatar's labor laws were at rock bottom. There was only one direction to go, and that was up. But should the ILO be cheering and endorsing that? Well, they did. And it set the wrong precedent. In June, Qatar's lobbying will be tested in Geneva. That's where the ILO will meet. The organization may have nominated Qatar, but the members must approve it. If they do, it will be an institutional failure for the United Nations, and it won't be the first. In 2020, China was appointed to the UN Human Rights Council. Their qualification? Jailing 1 million Uyghurs. In 2022, North Korea led the United Nations top disarmament group. What was their qualification? Lobbing missiles, I guess. What do these examples tell you? There's something inherently broken in the United Nations system. If you have money, you can circumvent it, like how China did with the Human Rights Council or Qatar with the ILO. But such appointments will have long-term consequences. A, they will erode trust in the UN or whatever is left of it, make it a laughing stock. And B, it will set back socio-economic progress. There is still time for the ILO to change course. Let's see what happens at their June summit. This is a tale of two economies. One is a superpower in decline, struck by political paralysis and staring at a default. The other is an emerging power with a decisive leadership and the world's fastest growing economy. I'm talking about the United States and India. Both countries are major economies, but they exhibit a stark contrast. I'll tell you how. And we are starting with the United States of America. For the first time in their history, the US could default on its debt. The government is running out of cash. The budget is being held hostage by political divisions. I'm talking about the US debt ceiling. And we've discussed this before on the show. The US government is about to hit its borrowing limit. Their only option is to raise the cap, to raise the debt limit. Right now, it's a little over $31 trillion. May sound like a lot of money, but it isn't enough for them. Team Biden wants to increase this limit. The opposition is not on board, and that is why America is close to a debt default. They have an odd system in place. The government cannot just borrow the money it wants. It needs the approval of the Congress, and that involves convincing the Republicans. But they're playing hardball.
So no, I don't think we're in a good place. I know we're not. This ignoring the problem, thinking it's going to go away, he could bumble his way just into a default like he did on the border.
That message was for Joe Biden. The Republicans are supposed to meet the president tomorrow, and he's running out of time. He must strike a deal within 2 weeks, else the U.S. could face international humiliation. For the first time ever, the U.S. could default on its debt. The U.S. Treasury has written a letter to the Congress. What does it say? It says Washington has time till the 1st of June. If the debt ceiling is not raised till the 1st of June, there will be a default. So the risk is real. Wall Street is preparing for the worst case scenario. Banks, brokers and traders are making plans. They fear a default will disrupt the market. So they're building cash reserves. They're planning how future payments can be handled, and they're preparing contingency plans. Now let me underline this. We are talking about the world's largest economy here, the US economy. A few months ago, some of their banks collapsed, and there was a ripple effect across the world. Imagine what would happen if the US government defaults. A new crisis is certain. It's hard to predict how bad it will be, but President Biden is optimistic. He says he can reach a deal.
Look,
their position and where
what I've learned a long time ago, and you know as well as I do, it's never as good to characterize a negotiation in the middle of a negotiation. I remain optimistic because I'm a congenital optimist.
Well, we wish him well, but the fact is his government is being held hostage over the budget. Compare this to India. No such crisis here. The economy is doing much better. Inflation is under control. There is no policy paralysis. In fact, the Indian economy is now driving global growth. Let me show you an assessment from Morgan Stanley. It believes India will contribute 16% of the global GDP. 16%. Let me quote from that report, in fact. India's strong growth outlook stands out as the best among large economies, and we forecast it will contribute 16% to global GDP growth over 2023-24. And what's working in India's favor? If you go by the report, it lists a lot of positives. Strong domestic demand and rising services export. The economy has largely recovered from the shock of the pandemic. Again, I have some numbers. GST, or the goods and services tax collection, has increased by 35% from pre-pandemic levels. Services exports have increased by 84% since October 2020. Passenger vehicle sales have also shot up by 131%. Again, this is an improvement from before the pandemic. So India has not just managed to bounce back, the Indian economy is in fact performing better than before. The point we are making is simple. These are times of economic uncertainty. Every day there are reports of job cuts. Not too long ago, there were predictions of recession. At a time like this, while India is driving global growth, the US is adding to global worries because of their domestic politics. Have you heard about India's Look East policy? It was unveiled in the 1990s. The idea was quite simple: to reach out to Southeast Asian countries like Malaysia or the Philippines or Thailand. But now there's a new question facing the Indian establishment. Should India be looking even further east? Where does that take us? To the Pacific. And why are we talking about this now? Because of two events. One, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's upcoming visit to Papua New Guinea. He'll be meeting leaders of 14 Pacific Island nations. And two, because of an apology from Fiji. We'll start with the last one, the apology from Fiji. Fiji's Prime Minister recently apologized to Indo-Fijians. For what? For a coup he organized in 1987. Back then, Fiji had two major ethnic groups, the indigenous Fijians and the Indo-Fijians. Now, the Indo-Fijians trace their ancestry to India, and they make a sizable chunk of the population. But in 1987, that changed. The military persecuted the Indo-Fijian community. More than 70,000 of these people were forced to flee the country. Now the Prime Minister says he's sorry.
To err is human, to forgive divine. Today, I, Sitiweni Lima Mandarumbuka, on behalf of those who were with me in 1987, ask for your forgiveness and pray that God will grant you the serenity, the power to forgive us. God bless you all.
As they say, time heals everything. Fiji's relations with India have improved recently. Prime Minister Modi visited the country back in 2014. He also announced multiple projects for Fiji. So why the apology now? Maybe because Pacific countries realize India's potential, which brings us to Prime Minister Modi's Papua New Guinea visit. Historically, this area has not been New Delhi's focus. Why is that? Because India is not a Pacific country. The focus was more on the Indian Ocean. New Delhi has just two resident missions there in the Pacific, one in Papua New Guinea and the other in Fiji. So just two missions in a region with 14 island nations. There was a lot of policy neglect and inertia. I'll give you an example. In 2014, India started a new forum, the Forum for India-Pacific Island Countries. The first summit was held in Fiji in 2014. That's what Prime Minister Modi attended. The second was held in Jaipur in India in 2015. And the third will be happening later this month in Papua New Guinea. Do you see the gap? 2 summits in 2 years, and then absolutely nothing for 7 years. The obvious question is, what has changed now? Why is the 3rd summit happening now? Because of India's Indo-Pacific policy. You can't be an Indo-Pacific power by limiting yourself to the Indian Ocean. You need a foothold in the Pacific as well. This region makes up 20% of the Earth's surface. It is home to several key trade routes. It could also become a front line in future conflicts. Let's rewind to the Second World War. The US and Japan fought most battles in the Pacific. Plus, we're talking about 14 countries here. Big or small, that's 14 votes at the United Nations. Important. So India's interest is understandable. But that's not why New Delhi is suddenly pivoting to the Pacific. That would be because of China. In the last 2 decades, China has invested heavily in the region. Their end game is this: to replace the US as the major Pacific power. That's what China wants. As always, the West was late to realize. And now they're rushing to make up. President Joe Biden will also be in Papua New Guinea along with Prime Minister Modi. Washington is trying to build an alliance there. In the month of March, Japan announced a plan to invest $75 billion. Now it's India's turn. Reports say multiple deals will be signed. When Prime Minister Modi is there, they'll cover small and medium industries, easing travel restrictions and cultural exchanges. The Pacific Islands are apparently interested in two very specific things: capacity building and disaster management. And India excels at both. Plus, New Delhi brings fresh perspective to the region. No colonial past, no World War hangover. India can be a trusted partner of the Pacific. The conditions are certainly there to force a lasting partnership. Let's see what happens on the 22nd of May. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Sudan. A fire broke out in the city of Omdurman. This is where intense battles have been fought between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary troops. In Italy's Pompeii, 2 more victims of a 2,000-year-old volcanic eruption have been found. In Peru, an anemic, malnourished and hypothermic sloth has been rescued. And finally, taking you back in history, what makes the 16th of May significant? On this day, the so-called Cultural Revolution was launched in China by communist leader Mao Zedong. The year was 1966. Mao wanted to assert, his authority over the Chinese government and the people. He felt that China was headed in the wrong direction. He wanted the so-called impure elements of the society to be purged. In the months and years that followed, elderly and intellectual people were attacked and harassed. Millions of people, were killed. Many were tortured and imprisoned. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Aveva la protezione, quella cosa tonda che si
email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.